Welcome to The Growing Band Director, the podcast that dives into topics applying to all of us band directors. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Together, we discuss many aspects of a school band program, including how to build your concert, jazz, and marching programs, as well as everything else we do as band directors. More importantly, we'll discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot." Let's get started. Hey everybody, I was very, very, very honored to sit down with not only Jeff, but Jim Vitagliano, two just sort of icons of visual design and marching band and drum corps and winter guard in the Northeast over the last 50 years. And, together they have about a century of experience. And it was a really amazing talk that I can't wait to bring you here in a second. I just wanted to jump on real quick before I played you that recording, just to, apologize a little bit for the audio that we were having. It was sort of one of those days where internet was kind of all over the place. And there was, I believe, some audio lag in the recording that was made. I think it was probably on my end, but that's sort of it, and I just wanted to apologize for that, and we're working hard to fix that stuff for the future. So on to the episode. Hope you guys learn a lot and have a great time. See you later. Well, welcome back and happy summertime. Welcome back to The Growing Band Director, everybody. We are very pleased to have a podcast today about the truths of general effect visual adjudication in marching band, and our guest is Jim Vitagliano. Jim has a very long and storied career of 43 years as a visual judge and teacher. Jim served as president of Massachusetts Judges Association from 2006 to 2019. Currently sits on the board of directors as past president and director of communications. He has also served on the WGI board of directors and was inducted into the Massachusetts Drum Corps Music Educator Hall of Fame in 2013. He's also a current judge in many circuits in the area. So we're very pleased to have him. Jim, how are you this morning?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Very good. And between you and Jeff, you guys have almost a century of teaching experience in this realm. So I bow to both of you. Jeff, how's your summer going?
Oh, it's great. It's I just finished babysitting two of my grandsons for a week, and then a week before that, babysitting their dogs. So it's been a interesting summer so far.
That's awesome. So, Jim, I'm a band director, and I come from I play the trumpet. I know how to march a dot, and I know how to learn the music on the page. Yet general effect seems to be a category that is much different from that. So I think a lot of band directors are like me, and we have a harder time understanding what general effect is, which is why we have this whole podcast. So I hope a lot of young band directors are going to learn from you guys. So Jim, could you give us a little bit more introduction to you and your experience as an educator and an adjudicator?
Sure. As Kyle mentioned, I did start teaching in 1979. I was 19 at the time. And my mentor, who actually got me into teaching, got me that first gig doing an indoor winter guard, believe it or not. I was a percussionist when I was marching myself. So it was somewhat new to me, although I always had the interest in twirling the rifle. So she got me very into the whole visual part of what we do as an activity. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. So I've been teaching ever since. I've not stopped. I'm still teaching to this day. So many years of experience teaching both drum corps, marching band, winter guard, indoor percussion. I've done it all, and from many different aspects. I've designed many shows. I've done teching at multiple levels. So a lot of experience, a lot of different experience in the visual arena. So, and I've been judging since 1988. George Oliviero and Debbie Torsha, who are two very prominent, George used to be the president of Massachusetts Judges Association, and Debbie, prominent members of the association and very well-known judges, got me very interested in doing the judging part of this. And so I've been doing it since '88. And I've judged, locally for all the circuits, and I've judged for DCA, DCI, WGI. So ton of experience there as well. It's been incredible, an incredible ride.
Well, I think that as we begin today, from my experiences for watching critiques and watching people design shows, one of the biggest problems for people or thing that creates confusion is what is general effect. So, Jim, could you give us your definition of what general effect is?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's people have very different views of what general effect are, depending on the world you come from. As Kyle mentioned, a person who is a musician learns the nuts and bolts of the performance. You don't really have a full enough understanding of what really goes into the concept of general effect. To me, general effect is the blend of everything that is presented in a program and presented in a way that becomes effective and entertaining for everybody that's watching. So there's so much that goes into that, but in a sort of general description of what I think general effect is, that's how I describe it.
Well, thank you. So what I've experienced is that, you get into a critique, and the first thing the band director or the staff comes up to the general effect judge says, well, this, and this, why aren't we getting an effect? How would you address it?
I would talk to them about how the pieces of the production were put together and why something that they might think is generating an effect may not be translating up to both the audience and to the people that have to adjudicate. So when you think about effect, not only do you have to think about moments in time as effects, you have to think about how all of those moments tie together to create a sort of overall effective impact in the show. You can have isolated moments in time that may generate emotion or whatever, or create a reaction from the audience or from the adjudicator. But if the pieces aren't tied together well, and there are moments in between where we lose our attention as viewers or listeners, that is where effect can break down. So you've got to be really understanding of how the pieces of the program tie together, because we're talking about effect for an entire program. We're not looking at effect in moments. We do look at effect in moments because they're all tied together very successfully. So I think that's one way I would approach it.
Yeah, I think the lapses are what creates the problem between one moment to the next moment. Have you ever run into the situation where somebody walks up to you in your critique and says, the kids have practiced hard all work, we've done a great job all week, why aren't we getting credit for it?
Yeah. Again, it really, listen, if somebody comes to, if we see a performance in 1 week and then we do see performance improvement, we're going to note that. There's no question about that, because the caption is broken into very specific categories. It's got a repertoire caption and a performance caption, and we have to recognize that. So, but the problems probably still exist in terms of how the effect of the program has been designed over time in the show. Now, yes, performance can increase those moments that we just talked about and make those a little bit stronger. But are all of your moments tied together in a way that create this really effective program from beginning to end? So yes, we would recognize performance improvements without a doubt, but that does not necessarily mean, it can impact repertoire. If you still have issues with how you coordinate your program and how you pick the program, we may still have those same comments a week later.
You were mentioning lapses in between moments. I remember a great friend who passed away a number of years ago, Al Yezwe. When I was a young band director, he told me about what he called the 20-second rule, about how every 15 to 20 seconds something should happen that catches the eye of people, and that can be musically or visually. But can you expound a little bit upon that? Because I'm sure there's some people who have never heard that before.
Yeah, that gets a little more complex, though, but it really depends on what your musical choices are. Because you can have many different flavors within a piece that you've chosen. So you may have something that's very aggressive and then moves into something that really is a little bit more subdued and mellow. So, that's one way of creating variety in your effects, which I think is very important. But what you want to be very careful about is, I think a lot of people have problems when you go from exciting, energetic moments, which I think people can relate to more easily than those that are more subdued and probably, a little more ethereal, things that require a little bit more fun. Those are the moments that have to be very carefully planned when you piece those pieces together. So you want to make sure that when you go from something that generated excitement and energy from an audience and judging perspective to something that's going to bring us down, that we actually feel that when it happens. You don't want to lose us when that happens, because sometimes what happens is you make a change, the atmosphere changes, and the tone or the quality of the sound changes, and you don't react to it because we're not getting that sense of emotion coming from the performers anymore. Or it sometimes can be how the repertoire was built. The piece constructed in a way that it's going to continue to engage the audience, and is it going to continue to engage the indicator in a way that makes it feel like it's all been tied together properly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say if you're going to have levels, and I like your example that you gave from Al Yezaway. I mean, a very dear friend of mine and somebody I really respected. That it's a good way of looking at it. You always want to make sure that you're engaging the audience as much as you possibly can throughout the show. And so tying those moments together whenever there is a change in atmosphere is really key to success in terms of pacing and coordination, which are very key elements of effect. So
I run to this, I'll present it. So you're in critique and the visual designer's talking to you. And they're talking about all these different effects that are going on in a certain part of the piece. But they never talk about what the music is doing while these visual effects are going on. So the coordination of the music to the visual doesn't occur. And a lot of times we have a disconnect in critiques because our visual designers have really not taken into consideration the full depth of what the music is creating as an opportunity for effect. Could you talk about that for a second?
Sure. That's an excellent point, Jeff. And one thing you always have to remember, the music always comes first. It's the music that drives the. So the visual designer is only reacting to the music that's been presented to them. So when you're putting your program together and you're thinking about what your repertoire is going to be over time in a program, you've got to be sure that you're presenting the rest of the design team with material that is going to provide opportunities for success. So if if you have this very complex repertoire, and the visual team hasn't been involved in sort of the discussions around how it's being built and all of that, they can interpret sometimes how they react to that. So, having a really strong team, number one, to react to the music, which again, I'll say it again, the music drives everything. That's the backbone. You've got to make sure that the team is well coordinated and understands what your original intent was when you thought about that repertoire, so that when they design the show from a visual perspective, they are in line with what your original intentions were. Then it usually works. Unless you've chosen a repertoire that just doesn't really generate a lot of emotion, or that's certainly a key factor.
Have you found that when you're in critique, stressful moments occur when you can obviously see that there hasn't been a good line of communication between the visual team and the music team, and there's conflicts, and like the general effect music judge is saying, well, your music's very effective, but the visuals are coordinating, and you're the visual judge saying your visuals are nice, but they don't coordinate to what the music's doing.
Right.
Is that something you've run into?
I have. I would say I've run into more situations where it kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Jeff, where people would react to an effect, but only a part of the effect. So maybe an interesting visual moment, or maybe it was an interesting musical moment, you know what I mean? But the two did not coordinate well. So, it all goes back to, again, really good planning. And I always talk to staffs about how they need to be coordinated as a team to make the project successful. I mean, you can't, I don't think there's any way that you can just send a visual person off on their own and say, here's the score, here's a recording of audio, now go ahead and create, without having a conversation as a team to decide, how you want to lay things out and how everything should be interpreted. So.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff. So, and Jim, can you guys talk a little bit about like the nuts and bolts about what that planning might look like? Like Jeff, I look to you because you and I have planned for a number of years together now. But like, at what sort of detail do we go into when it comes to planning the shows and those effect moments? And we start like November, right?
Yeah.
We kind of start November, and it's a slow process that takes us until through the season, really. But can you talk about a little bit more about, like, if there's some teachers here who have never done this amount of planning with their visual staffs before, what do you think is the ideal route to go?
Well, in my experience, actually, when preparing for a fall dance season, we've actually started preparing probably in the February, March, April of the previous year. I mean, we're already thinking about repertoire at that point. So typically, what I have, this has just been my experience in the past with one of my long-term groups that I worked with, and Misty Gesaway, as a matter of fact. We would meet early on with those music heads who were thinking about what the repertoire was going to look like, and they would ask for suggestions as well. We would kind of pool our ideas together about thoughts that we had for music, and visual people can make good choices musically too.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't forget that. But we always go back to our musical leaders, who then sit us all down and we have a conversation about why those choices were made. What were they envisioning when they thought about making those choices? And what kinds of things were they thinking from a design perspective they wanted to see brought to life? So then we can start having some discussions about, yes, that would be great. Let's maybe chat about this. So it was a number of team meetings between, and it's not, you don't have to have your whole staff involved in this. It really has to be the designers doing this. And then the designers can communicate this down to the people who do technician work and that sort of thing. But you're going to start having a lot of conversations back and forth about how the show is going to lay out over time. And you would put together sort of like a storyboard where we would look at each particular piece of the show and decide, this is the visual impact of this particular section. It's going to tie together to this next piece in this way. We're going to use this prop to make that happen, or we're going to change this color, or we're going to add this element. I mean, there's so many different ways you can approach it, but the key point being that you want to work your way with the entire design team, both music and visual and percussion, of course, as well, to storyboard the show beginning to end. And then everybody has to be in agreement that this is how we want to take. If you're not in agreement, you need to go back to the drawing board. That's all there is to it, because it's never going to be successful unless all of you designers are on board. And that's my experience.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So here we come to that age-old question that happens every effect critique. Okay, music's coordinated well with the visual and everything, and then we take the guard component, and the guard component is incorporated into the drill well, but systems of colors, appropriate equipment, use of the triad, things of that nature are less than the best. How do you address that in a general effect caption?
Yeah, I think, and I've had a lot of experience with this, and I've worked with multiple levels of, new folks coming in who are really energetic, just off the performance arena, and they think they're going to conquer the world. And then you've got those that are, a little bit more experienced because they've worked with some designers or they've had some chance to design on their own. And they are beginning to understand how a show is put together as a team. And then you've got your very experienced designers who are completely in line with the entire team and are not afraid to hear commentary, even from a music person. If a music person talks to me and says, I would love to see Bags doing this during this section, that's something that the color guard person should be.
Mhm.
Clearly, there was a vision in that person's head about what they were expecting to see there. So that's where those conversations take place. And it's hard because newer guard staff don't like to hear their work being challenged. And so they need to be brought into the picture, I think, soon enough so that it needs to be explained to them that this is a team effort. The design team has to agree on everything before we decide we're going to move forward. So bring your ideas to the table and then let us discuss whether or not they're appropriate for the section that we're working on. So that's tough,
Yeah.
And again, that's not a diss on new instructors because they're so energetic and so willing to work, but there is some ego involved at times as they feel as though their work is being challenged, and so you just have to get them out of the mold.
Well, I think two things I've learned is that the longer you do it, the more you realize what you don't know. And the more you need to work at trying to understand all the new nuances that are coming out and incorporating them appropriately, rather than saying everything. I think, as time goes on, you just realize, that didn't work. We got to be honest about it. Say that was a great idea on paper, but once we left the paper, it stopped working real fast. And you got to be willing to accept criticism and not take it as a personal front, but just, good try, but maybe that's not the right try. So
another interesting approach, though, is especially for color guard people, and we talked about storyboard as a team. Another effective thing to do for the color guard team is for them to storyboard their own show and have that ready when you start having team discussions. It makes it so much easier to really then talk about whether or not some of the choices they've made are what was envisioned originally.
Yeah.
So because you might find something coming from a color guard person that might change your perspective as a music director or a percussion director.
Quite often, I agree.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. I remember. I can give you a great example. When I was teaching Salem, New Hampshire, they had a massive drum line one year, massive battery, and they were quite good in my opinion. And so we were trying to figure out what to do with this really what we thought was an excellent percussion that was written for them. And the percussion staff had a very specific vision of what that was. And so I went back with the color guard team and as the visual designer, and we talked about what we thought would work there. And it was a total 180 from what the rest of the design team was thinking. But when they saw it presented and we talked about it as a team, that's because they felt that was a better choice. So there's some play back and forth here that you can work with in your design teams that you can support one another that way. So
yeah, I agree. So you and I both were very intensely schooled by DCA in a change in conceptual judging in general effect. And that was the use of the word entertainment. And I think as we look at the progression of DCA, over COVID aside, but over the time, we've seen that entertainment become a very important part of what they're doing as well as DCA. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes our band director friends get a little too ethereal and forget that the audience is there because they want to be entertained. How do you feel about entertainment as it pertains to the general effect caption?
I think it's very important. Depends on the sheet that you're working as a judge, but it is very, very important. I mean, I always look at it this way. When I think about what we're doing out there and the people that are sitting there watching it, I always think that they have paid money to come in and watch a performance. So think about going to any paid performance, whether it's the theater or a concert, whatever. You're paying money because you want to be entertained. So you have to take that into consideration. So if you start thinking about doing, like Jeff mentioned, very ethereal shows, those can be very entertaining, but you have to be extremely intelligent about how you approach those. And you've got to make sure that you're taking the people who are sitting there watching it on a ride as they watch the show. It can't just all of a sudden very sort of out there, ethereal feel to the program, and people are just like, what is happening here? you're not connecting in a way that is bringing any sort of emotion. So entertainment can have very, very components. It can be exciting, it can be energetic, it can be sad, it can be mellow, it could be jazzy. There's so many different feelings that you could to really display entertainment quality. So keep that in mind. It's very important. I think if you engage the audience, what the choices are, you are entertaining them.
Yep, I agree. So here's the thing that I think we both have run into. Visual ensembles versus general effect. Could you discuss the comparison between the two? Because I think that's the biggest question mark in some of our colleagues' minds as to how to approach those captions and those judges.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Jeff. And it's the age-old issue that we've had as judges. Now, I judge both captions. I do judge effect and I do judge ensemble. And I have to think before I sit down and do a show. Okay, I'm on ensemble today. I've got to completely change my mindset on how I'm going to approach this caption. Because there are some similarities between the two, especially in the performance and excellence piece of it. Some similarities, but the main thing to think about is effect reactionary caption. The people that are adjudicating effect are reacting to your program. The people that are judging ensemble are analyzing your program because their job is to look at the overall design of the show and to make sure that the design is being displayed with really good design quality. Mm-hmm. As repertoire, you're looking at how pieces of the show are put together and how they impact the audience. Does that make sense? So really, I always separate out the caption that ensemble, I analyze the show. I'm looking at the nuts and bolts of the show. Effect, I'm reacting to it. I'm letting it come to me and I'm letting it, and I'm reacting to it based on how it impacts me from an entertainment perspective or from, an emotional standpoint. I mean, so I think that's a really good way to kind of separate out what those two captions are really about. And then when you get to the excellence piece of ensemble, excellence in ensemble gets into a little bit nitty gritty of the training, the skills, the nuts and bolts of getting the performers to be where they are from an excellence perspective. Whereas in effect, performance is how do the performers react to the material that they are presenting? Are they displaying emotion? Are they, if they have an acting role in the show, are they really displaying good acting quality? If they are supposed to be, changing the atmosphere on the field by either, relaxing a little bit more or being more tense or whatever, are they displaying that? And there is some technique involved as well in making those qualities happen, but it's more about how we react to how the performers are delivering their show. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes 100% sense to me. How about you, Kyle? Does that? So if we take this, the thing that I know you've experienced, person walks into critique. Well, we had a variety of climaxes all over the place, all different types, all different stagings. Why in a repertoire effectiveness aren't we getting as much credit as Joe Blow or whomever, the other group? How would you do?
My immediate reaction to that would probably, if I had to guess what the issue was in a situation like that, I would say it's probably the pacing of the program.
Right. So that comes back to what we talked about earlier, the lapses.
Yes. Right. You can have as many, in ensemble, they call them vertical moments, where you have a moment in time where a design idea is presented. And then you have what's called horizontal moments, which is the information that's happening between each one of the vertical moments that you present. So when you think about that from an effect standpoint, that's good pacing. If you have a strong moment that you're presenting, and now you're going to lead us to the next really big effect moment of the show, that piece in between also has to carry effective quality. Mm-hmm. You can't just, transition moments cannot just be, pedestrian. They have to have the same level of quality that you put in any other moment in the show, the reaction might be different. You know what I mean? If you present something that's a high energy climax, and then you bring up to the next moment where you're going to have a high energy moment, you still have to have audience connection and some sort of emotional reaction to what's happening in between. And that's the beauty of effect. When it's done really well, the show has that really strong sense of pacing. That is when you're going to have total participation and judge reaction throughout.
So I've got a question. I may not pose this exactly right, so please rephrase it whatever way you think is the right way. Many times I'll be standing outside a room before critique, listening to some of my colleagues talk, and they'll say, well, I listen to the tapes, and they're saying, this is just very pedestrian. And they're saying, what's pedestrian? Do you explain to our listeners what pedestrian is?
Sure. I think it kind of goes back to what I was just talking about before. I think pedestrian, I don't think it's meant to be used in the true sense of the word. When we think about pedestrian, we think about, people just walking across the street with no real intention. So if you apply that to what we're doing, a pedestrian moment in the show is one of those moments where you've created a design element that just isn't translating. It's just not translating, or you've done something that didn't tie two very strong ideas together in an effective way, or from an ensemble perspective in a logical way. Okay? Mm-hmm. So you've got to be sure that a good example of it would be, let's say you've got a really great moment happening with batteries, and it's all unfolding really well front stage, and then you've got the guard sort of a framed frame design behind them, and now all of a sudden it's time to make a change. So we go into transition, and the guard just kind of runs to the back and drops their stuff and picks up another flag and then runs back in. That is a pedestrian moment. Because every moment of the show, even a moment when the guard has to exit the stage to make a color change, it has to be designed into the show. So how you take them to that next moment to make the color change has to include something that coordinates with the winds and the battery as they're doing their magnificent moment up front. Does that make sense? So some sort of choreography of some sort, even going as detailed as going down to pick up the next piece of equipment, choreographed in a way that really blends with what the winds and percussion are saying at that time. And then when that introduction of color is there, it becomes a true spectacular effect, because you then change the atmosphere in the field successfully. Otherwise, it's just all broken up. Excuse me, you've probably lost some of your audience at that point, because all they're doing is watching people run to go pick up flags. I would give that as a really good example of a pedestrian moment in the show.
So I'm going to take that pedestrian concept you just made and bring it back to a staff thing. So years ago, I wrote for the group, and I took a lot of time to make sure that I assigned the guard people to the equipment I wanted them to be based on what the staff had told me what they wanted. And I worked a nice gradual integration of leaving the field and coming back on the field and bringing new equipment. So it wasn't like you a run to a trash barrel run where you run to the front, get ready to flag, and pick up a new one. And I thought I did a pretty good job. So they get to the first show and they send me back the judge's tapes, and the judge's tapes say, what the heck is going on? So I asked them to send me a movie. So I saw a movie, and I coordinated it so the flags were going to come in, and then that some were going to come out with weapons, and some were going to come out with another piece of equipment. But having people, I got it so it was sequential, and I'm watching all these people cross paths. And what it was is, well, we decided we wanted different people on the equipment, so we just changed it and to go to different spots. And I know when I've sat on your side of the table, I've said to our friends that, why did you everybody go? Well, the writer wrote it one way, and we decided to do it a different way, and we thought it would just work just fine. Have you run into that problem where what you've written, maybe for a long distance client, comes back as being a full positive jewel and not looking exactly the way you intend to be?
Yes, I have. I had this experience not too long ago with a group that I was writing for in California. Um, well, part of it is, the difficulty in doing long distance writing is you don't know the students as well as you do when you're on site. So I'm taking information from the designers and they're telling me who the key individuals are and where they need to be at any specific point in time. So as a designer, it's my job to make sure that I coordinate pieces of the show in a way that makes those decisions in a logical and effective way. But not everybody has the ability to do that. So this goes back to the beginning of this podcast where we talked about storyboarding and working out all of the details of the show. This is why, with Color Guard, it's very important for them to storyboard out the show and bring it to design meetings so that you have those types of conversations ahead of time. You don't want to start writing before you know which players you want where on the stage. I think, Jeff, that's what's happening is, if you don't have those discussions ahead of time, those are the kinds of things that can happen.
And the reason I brought this up is because a lot of our colleagues have long distance writers, and they sometimes have long distance guard writers where the guard instructor sends a video of the work they want them taught. The kids watch the video and they're assisted in learning it that way. But I think our colleagues need to realize, the band directors and the staff, that if you have a long distance writer, you need to communicate what the problem is and give the writer a chance to adjust rather than them making adjustments on a fly. Sometimes a hurried adjustment creates more long-term problems in a show than a thoughtful, maybe delayed adjustment that would create a better transition moment and give the ensemble, give the kids more credit for what they're doing. Because
Right.
a lot of times I find that the problems with a group not doing well or the kids not doing well has nothing to do with the kids, but it has to do with the writers and the meeting of the minds to get it so it all works together. And so for all our long distance friends out there, everybody's got to do their way based on the availability of writers and instructors and stuff. But communication is the key to getting it to work. Now, you brought up a point a few minutes ago that I thought was really succinct to the GE caption. You were talking about the emotions and the kids buying into the show and physically and facially showing their emotional range. So do you find that sometimes you'll get to a show, you'll have kids that can throw 5, 6s, catch them like swipe those sabers out of there, tosses with the flag, great flag work, but it's like looking at a blank sheet. And I don't think some of our colleagues recognize that emotional range that the children, I should say, the students show to the audience is the connective. Am I correct or am I wrong about that?
You are. And I think it's a typical problem that we see early on in the season because clearly groups are very focused on the technical aspect of what they're doing early on. So, the students are really focusing on skill and achievement of skills at that point, because that's what's really been the major body of work, I think, up to that point. One of the things that I've done in the past, especially with very successful color guards, is you have to build in the piece that talks to emotion and talks to effect as you're training them, because those are skills too. If you ask somebody to act in a show, you can't just expect them to deliver what you're asking of them without giving them a little bit of training. I mean, there is some technique behind acting too. So, as you're doing your technique program, which we have, as we all know, color guards have very technical programs. They teach them how to dance, they teach them how to spin, they teach them how to coordinate those two things together. But they never really get into, and I'm talking more about inexperienced color guard people. The more experienced color guard folks know how to blend all of the training aspects into their training programs. So you get out there, if you've worked on if you're going to do some technical work with them, build in some things where they have to act and talk to them about what they need to do with their bodies or their faces to bring that acting moment to life. Because it really is, I mean, there are physical skills necessary to make those things happen. So if you build those into your technical program, especially things that you're thinking about for your upcoming program, as soon as you start laying those things out in the fields, they already have a better understanding of what it is they're supposed to be interpreting at that particular moment in time. They're doing what Jeff said. They're doing very strong technique, moving from dot to dot, twirling in, as well as they've been trained to twirl, without that strong sense of connection to what's actually happening from a musical perspective. So very, very important thing. I think if you're gonna build in those character moments in the show, build them into your training program.
And also, don't you find that sometimes you'll see groups where the guard is like unbelievable, their emotional projection, their equipment, and then you got the horn players and the drum line, they're just standing there like blank moments. And sometimes we as musicians tend to forget that we have to teach them, the horn players and the battery and the pit, that they have to demonstrate those same emotional characteristics that the guard show, so that there's a cohesiveness and coordination.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, that all goes to training. You are working with winds and battery in a training program for, just their skills, lower body skills and, posture and all of that. Again, when you storyboard your show, if there's something that you think you're going to require of the winds and the battery that's going to take them off center, for instance, if they have to do something that requires movement, or maybe some sort of an acting role, build it into one of your technical exercises. Yeah. So they just, repetition, we all know, practice makes perfect. And repetition, especially when you're doing things like that, so that the muscle memory begins to kick in, makes it so much easier when you have to lay it out, as part of the actual design of the show.
Yeah. So what do you think are the common, in your experience, what have you found to be the common misunderstandings of general effect?
It goes back to what you were talking about before, Jeff, that lack of information about the ensemble and effect captions. I think a lot of people are always thinking that judges are judging the content, and they want to make sure that they're getting all of the elements of the demand and the variety. Those are elements of effect for sure. But as I said before, effect is a reactionary caption. We're not analyzing and tearing the show apart like an ensemble judge would do. And I think that's always been the biggest issue. Staffs come in and they combine the concepts of those two captions together, and it's hard, you have to go through the whole explanation of that.
Oh, yeah. So here's a point that I'm going to bring up that you and I have dealt with past few years together, and that is the professionalism or manners of people in critique towards the judging community. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I've had a range of different experiences with people. In young days, I had some moments that I wish I could have taken back. I was very passionate and emotional about what I was doing, and I wasn't in agreement with what adjudicators were saying to me, and I delivered that information in probably a very poor way at that time. And I learned over time that when you come in and speak with somebody who is really only trying to make you better, the best way to approach it is to have a calm, intelligent conversation with that person about where you can either make improvements or to talk about those things that you're doing wonderfully that you could probably reproduce even more in other moments in your show. So the best approach, in my opinion, is to be prepared when you walk into the room. If you are emotional about, maybe you're not happy with your scoring or commentary or something, you have to leave that outside of the room. You've got to make a conscious effort to just leave the emotion out of it. Maybe make some notes as you're listening to your recap from the judge, and have specific points that you want to talk about when you come in. don't come in with some raging emotion and think that you're going to get anything accomplished, because all you're going to be doing is battling back and forth, someone telling you to calm down, or there's nothing constructive happening there. So how are you helping to make your group better in that situation? So come prepared, be calm, approach it intelligently, and do everything you can to get the information to help your group to get better.
I also think it's really important to have everybody assume that everybody else is doing their best, right? If you're a teacher and you're in there, assume that the adjudicator did their best to help you. Also understand they may have seen 8 to 20 shows that day already, and you are one of the 8 to 20 shows. And that the adjudicators should also remember that the staff probably at that time is doing the best they can, right? And you're right, as young teachers, we always get emotional because we care so much about it. And that sort of measured approach and not trying to think that everybody else is wrong and that your way is the only way. Sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow. I think we've all been there. Jeff,
I will say, I've noticed, sorry, Jeff, I noticed over time that the instructors that never learned how to do that well are the instructors that didn't last. Mm-hmm. They get away from the activity. They just, because, they got pushed away, basically. Those that approached it and really wanted to learn more about how to do an effective critique and, how to communicate better between, your staff members and judges, those have been the most successful staff members I've seen. And those are the people that go on to greatness and make wonderful productions. So.
And Jeff, you come across very calm in this setting, but I've seen you in some moments where you are not so level-headed.
Oh, and I was going to say, I'm the first to say that, yeah, I sometimes get upset, and sometimes I have to back and say, okay, here's what we got to do. We've got to think about this a little bit more. But I do think the one thing that people need to realize when they go into critique, if you try to talk about everything at a critique all at once, you're never going to get anything accomplished. You've got to pick out specific things to discuss, because you only get 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes to talk. And you got to deal with what you think was or was not taken care of.
And Jeff, there's something I really wanted to have people know that I've learned a lot from you as well, is you may have the whole show planned when it comes to the effect category, but you don't teach the whole show in the beginning. I know, and where we teach together now, we have the show that we learn, and then every week we sort of unveil some more things for the kids to learn, even up through the week of championships. So it does 2 things. And again, I'm giving you credit for this because I learned this from you, is not only do the judges and the audience see something new every week, and that keeps them engaged and wondering what's going to happen next. And I'll bet you that helps your general effect score. But at the same time, it keeps the kids engaged. So the show isn't the same for 9 weeks in a row. It's constantly being improved and changing. And the fact that you always have these tricks up your sleeve, you're like, yep, they're not ready for it yet. But then when they're ready for it, you give it to them, and it brings the show to a whole new level.
Well, I also think from what Jim said, that you glean a lot of information from the judges, but sometimes when you're in critique or you listen to tape, you're not getting it. And as a writer and as a teacher and as a judge, you got to go back and review your tapes and say, I didn't look at it from that perspective. And at the moment, I couldn't look at it from that perspective because I was too busy harping on one thing. And you go back and you learn and you say, well, maybe we should have tried this. And you try it and you find out, you get a lot more credit. And I'll be the first, and everybody knows this who knows me, that this is like a contradiction in statements, but you get more positive with honey than you do with vinegar. And Jim knows me well, and he knows that I can go and critique like a bull in a china shop, and sometimes not. But I've always told the judges that worked with any group that I've been involved with is, don't treat me with kid gloves, because I'm not going to get better if I'm treated by kid gloves. The only reason the program that I've written for, taught for, have improved is because judges have been very clear, concise, and frank about what they like. And they didn't get caught up with worrying whether I would be offended in a critique. I think it's important that we realize that, as Kyle said, and as Jim said, judges are here to help your program improve. And you've got to be open-minded enough to realize that and try some of the things they say. Sometimes they won't work. Sometimes they will work, or sometimes they will work 3 weeks or 4 weeks down the road. And you've always got to listen, and you've always got to review those tapes and those sheets to say, why were they saying that? And it might click, or maybe another staff member might say it might click. But
one other very important thing, though, to understand is the judges are not the be-all, end-all of information. We are also learning from you folks. It's very important for you to understand that. So, when Jeff talks about, coming in and being what I consider assertive, not aggressive. And I respect that because Jeff is a really seasoned, very talented, he's had many incredible groups over the years. So when I listen to Jeff, I make sure that if there's something that he's saying that I can grow from, I have to listen to that. I can't put up a wall and say, you have to do everything we're telling you. And we're not always perfect either. So we try to be as perfect as we can be, but we're not always perfect either. So we like to learn from you folks. I mean, sometimes there may be a new, Kyle, you're the same way. You're very intelligent. I mean, when you come in, you're very prepared. We listen to what you're saying because you might be saying something to us that we've never thought of before, or we've never heard of before, and that we need to take the time to learn more about. And a good example of that is maybe you've chosen a repertoire piece that is so, has such a different type of structure to it and something that we're not used to. We might have a different kind of reaction to that as an effect person. Then you can come in and talk to us and say, look, here's what the original intention of that was, and this is what you need to learn about that. And we're open to that. I mean, I want to find out every bit of information I can so that when I look at your show the next time, I understand what I'm watching. I mean, there are many times when I watch a show and I say, I don't know what's happening here. It might feel and look okay, but I don't understand what the message is. So, those are the kinds of places where we can either learn from you guys or you can learn from us about, how do you make your message stronger. But, Jeff, don't ever feel like you're coming in and strong arming us. You're always very assertive and you're protecting your program, and we respect that. So,
well, thank you. I think that one thing that you just said is really important. Well, everything you said is really important, but what you just mentioned was important is that, when you go in and a judge understand your program, sometimes a director or a staff solution is to write this document that's 2 pages long explaining what the show's all about. And my thing is that that's really nice because that makes you as the director or the staff feel good. But if you aren't showing that demonstratively through what you're doing, it doesn't matter what's on the sheet of paper. You and I experienced a group where they said one thing on their sheet of paper and then looked at the show and we came back and said afterwards, I don't get how it fits that. And we brought that up in critique, and it took a while for them to figure it out, but they finally did figure it out, that what they wanted it to look like and what they said it was going to look like and what the members of the group were doing were totally diverse to what was going on. So I don't think, I think writers need to make the judges understand better, think about what is being seen rather than what they want to be seen. I think like Kyle, it's like when we're doing a band and we hear the Stan Kenton band on our head, but Stan Kenton isn't playing that music on that stage right at that moment. We don't want to hear what's in our head, but we want to hear what we see here on stage is being there. And I think that's something that's, as I get older and the directors, we need to communicate that so that we have a better long communication and understanding.
There was a thought. I'm sorry. There's a thought that just came to me, Jeff, that and this is going back in the conversation just a little bit, but when we talk about teaching the kids to be dramatic, my line with kids is always like, look, you're high school kids. Drama is all you do. Like, how to be dramatic, right? Sometimes just getting them to get what they do in their everyday life and trying to put that on the field in an appropriate way is like a way to get the barrier down to get them to actually do some acting. So I know
that's how actors learn. I mean, they learn from life experience. So
yeah. So,
And
so
we
it
as
is, yeah.
teachers learn from those experiences, and writers and judges, we learn. We do all those things.
Jeff, your thing about the pieces people provide about, with the description, I think that works really well for the highest level of competition.
Right.
Those at the very highest level of Drum Corps International or WGI, because those people are really at a place where they're coming up with such sophisticated concepts that you might need a little bit of explanation to kind of get, into the moment. But when we're talking about, lower, and I don't mean lower level from just good or bad, lower level, less experienced, not as professional as these, high level drum and bugle corps and WGI groups. Putting a description out there then sets a set of expectations for the adjudicator. Now, the example that you gave, Jeff, when we had the conversation with the group that gave us this preamble, they wanted us to talk about everything that was listed in that preamble. But we couldn't because it didn't exist in the performance.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to set yourself up for failure by putting something like that out and then not delivering every element of that, because we only can judge what we see on that particular moment. So just a caution about how, if you're going to do something like that, write it up in a way that might be a little bit more general, just to give sort of a feel of what the show is, rather than trying to describe what every moment in the program is going to be, that I think can set you up for some problems.
And I think Kyle does this well, that during the course of the season, he invites people to come in, judges, other writers, to come in and view the program. And he talks with them about, did you get that idea? Did what we're trying to do come across to you? Because I think that is an important thing. And to me, the most important performance of the year is the end of band for the parents. And what I try to do is I try to hide amongst the parents and just be as anonymous as possible and listen to their discussions, because being parents, yes, they have the link with their child. Oh, Johnny or Susie is doing a great job. But then if they get a little deeper and you start listening to them talk about the show, you hear what they understand, but you hear what they don't understand. And if we can't get an effect response from the parents, well, then we're sure as heck not going to get an effect response from an adjudicator, because the parents are the most bought in group of people. And sometimes they have the most innocent yet succinct comments on how to improve a show.
Jeff, will you tell us a little bit about the what you've done with parents in the past to try to plant them in the audience at shows, teaching them when to clap, teaching them how to react to help your general effects score?
Well, I talk to parents about when the big effect moments are, so they understand when to clap, because sometimes they'll come and watch rehearsal and they're quiet because they don't want to make any noise and disrupt things. And I try to explain to them that that's not the reality of performance. The reality of performance is to respond. And sometimes they're looking over at their child on stage left, and there's this big moment occurring on stage left, right. And I got to say to them, that's what you got to respond to. That's the moment that's coming. And that I think you need to respond, and you need to make sure that you respond to it. If they do it well, give them the credit they do. And I do say to them, don't just sit in one place in a big clump, because then everybody says, well, that's so-and-so's high school. Those parents are just responding to their high school. Because sometimes, because of competition, parents of other schools tend to sit on their hands quite often. And I'm sure you've seen it, Jim, with the years you did where you've written for Portsmouth or you've written for Salem, and you see the Salem parents going crazy. Yeah, that's great. And the others are just sitting there, just staring around. And one of the things I've always tried to do is to teach beyond my classroom. And that is to teach the audience that you have to respond to what the kids do by spreading my parents out. But in return, I always said to my parents, also, please respond to the other groups. Don't ever sit on your hands. Be responsive, because the group that I used to teach years ago, we'd get, as Jim can attest, you'd get the main shows and there'd be our competitors, and we were in a little bit more harshly competitive scenario than we are in Maine. And we'd have parents that would just sit on their hands when my kids would come out on the field. And we were talking maybe 5,000 people. And some parents in their groups would just collectively sit on their hands. But I told my parents, don't ever sit on your hands. I want you to clap for everybody and everything, every kid, because every kid out there is trying their hardest to be as productive, musical, visually concise, and emotionally demonstrative of what they're trying to do. And
Jeff, that's a really, really great point. I mean, think though, if you've designed shows before and you've performed in front of a crowd, think back on the end of the performance and how was the crowd reacting at the end of the performance? Was it the appreciative clap for thank you for coming and we appreciate the fact that you did what you did, or are they on their feet? A crowd that's on their feet.
Or the other thing is, like, say you're in a show like Kyle brought up, 25 bands. Well, if you're band 1, 2, 3, or 4, and there's nobody there, you're not getting much response. And, if you're going to go to a show, go to the beginning of the show and stay through the whole show and let everybody enjoy it and give response to everybody.
Well, let me ask you guys, because you guys work together as a team now. I know in my past when working with the staff, when we were doing full performance runs at a rehearsal, we would talk as a staff about how we felt at the end of that. So if we're not reacting during performance, something is not right. So, we're not, it doesn't just have to be the audience. I mean, the staff as well needs to feel something from the performers. And then you need to respond to the performers when you have felt that. Mm-hmm. No, you either achieved it, remember that feeling, let that muscle memory kick in, that sort of thing. So are you guys on the same page with that? Do you feel like...
I'm going to speak up first. Because I think I'm the last one to respond, because as the band director, who is, even though I may not have the most experience, I'm the last line of defense. I'm the one who has to call the parent. I have to make sure that I'm quote unquote in charge all the time. I'm always waiting for what tragedy is about to happen. I'm not enjoying the moment at the time, where I think a lot of the staff members will come off the field and they'll say, oh my gosh, this was amazing. That was amazing. I had chills. And I'm like, I didn't notice any of that. I was just happy that the electricity stayed plugged in and, nobody fell in the wet mud and all that. So I think each staff probably has those members of people who feel it more and don't. I feel it more in rehearsals. I have rehearsals where I'm not really worried about things, but in performance, to me, some people afterwards will say, well, how'd you think they do it? I'm like, I don't know. I've heard the show 6,000 times. To me, it's the same every time, even though it's not.
Yeah, and thank you, Kyle. That's a really good point, because I'm talking specifically about in rehearsal mode.
Oh.
How does the staff react in rehearsal mode? I think that's such an important thing for kids to, get a feeling from.
And my position is different than Kyle's. When I'm in rehearsal, I'm in the analytical mode. I'm not in the effect mode, because I'm looking around trying to see, okay, that's not working right. Why is it not working right? And how can I fix it to make it work right? And when I get to shows, I try to be as quiet as possible, but I'll clap when I'm supposed to clap, and when I feel things are going well. But I won't go crazy, because I don't want audience members to look at me. I want the audience to pay attention to the young people on the field that are performing. And I watch, and I'm sure you've seen this, Jim, where you get some schools where the staff's up near the top. They strategically place themselves right in front of the box or right next to the box, and they're going crazy, clapping and all this stuff. And it's like they're performing. I don't want to see them perform. I want to see what the kids do on the field, how they're performing, and help them along the way. And then I always have the rule that after a performance, they ask me, how did we do? And I'd say, I'm not going to talk about it right now. And I'd prefer that you not talk about it till we get back together as a group. And then we talk about it and we can analyze the great things we did and the things we need improvement, because each sequence is an improvement. And
what about those staffs who say, well, when I'm screaming for my kids, that shows them that I'm supporting them, and that helps relax them when they hear me scream from 10,000 feet away?
Yeah, I've gotten that before many times. And listen, it's all well and good. The thing that gets a little distorted, though, is when people react to a success that's happening in the group. But when we're looking at it from an adjudication perspective, it's only a moderate success. You know what I mean? So, for instance, I hate to go back to color guard all the time, but color guard is a good example because there's more opportunity for, like major visual error with them. You have a group of rifles standing across the front of the field. They throw a toss. The tosses go up. It's disastrous. We think about it as an adjudicator from a technical perspective. The rotations are not straight. The pitch isn't very good, but every single one of them caught it. And the staff goes bananas. And then they come into the routine. They're all excited because their 8 rifles all caught those rifles on that effect moment, but we didn't react to it. So you have to be able to analyze the entire moment. I mean, we're looking at performance, and part of performance is excellence, and excellence in itself is an effect. So, we have to be very cautious about how we react to achievement and the different levels of achievement. And the staffs need to be able to understand that, if you want the ultimate, you have to produce the ultimate, which means everything that sheet lists has to be in order for you to get ultimate score.
It's
not just the finish, it's everything that happens to make that finish good.
You just mentioned something that sort of hit home for me. Like when we're teachers in marching band, as band directors or staff members, we know more than the kids. We know more than the parents. We're in a place where we know more than everybody else. Well, the minute we go and we're dealing with a judge, there's a good chance that for the first time in a year since you've been judged last, you haven't been in a room with somebody who knows more than you. And I'm not saying every judge knows more than you about everything, but
yeah,
we sometimes forget, well, wait a minute, I thought it was perfect. And now you have to, as a teacher, realize, well, the judges they were looking at a higher level and they're trying to bring you to that higher level.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to Kyle, to the discussion we were having about younger, newer staff members.
Yeah.
Who have a different perception of what excellence is. I was trained by, with the Zingali mindset and worked with him for a number of years and learned what the definition of technique is. And so when you break something down second by second by second to make it perfect, but you don't understand that, each one of those seconds builds to make a successful phrase. I understand that with a newer instructor. I mean, those people just have to be, brought along and trained to understand how important the excellence piece of what we do is to the whole thing. This is an activity about excellence before anything. So we always have to keep that in mind when we think about how successful something may or may not be. So
I can just draw 2 comments to what you said. When I was band director, my staff and I we'd talk before we go to shows and how we would respond. And I had, won't mention his name, but Jim knows him real well, lives in Florida now. And he said to me, look me straight in the face, and the whole staff says, do you know why instructors go crazy at a show? And I said, well, I think so, but you tell me. He said, well, they go crazy because it's their insecurity as to whether the child is going to catch that piece of equipment. And that's why they do that, rather than having the faith in the child and letting the child catch the equipment and not steal the moment from the child.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that. So my staff and I would talk when I was teaching all the time, would talk about insecurity of staff. Trust the children, have faith in the children. You're not at the show to perform. The children are there to perform. And then I'll give one example. I had a really large guard, 46 people in guard, and I had a rifle line of 12. It was a real windy night, very windy night, very dangerous. And so there's this toss. It was a 6. And my instructor said, now, don't be shocked when you see what happens in the show. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, don't be shocked. So all the rifles tossed, and then they went like this, and the rifle hit the ground. And the audience went crazy because my instructor felt that it was too dangerous for the kids to try to catch because the wind drift was going all over the place, 20-mile-an-hour wind. And he said, is it better that they get hurt and try to catch it, or we make it into a brief comedic moment and allow everybody to walk away and have another show the next day, and we don't have concussions. And I thought that was very insightful on his part, that he analyzed the situation to decide what was the safest way for the children to function. And that was the same person who said, we're not here to perform, the kids are here to perform. We can have all this kumbaya rah 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 before and after, but let the kids perform. Have a sense of security that what you have taught the children will be produced on the field, and let them have the moment, and let the parents have the moment to clap for them, instead of looking at these instructors around screaming and yelling names and stuff. So, that's an
bringing that all back to effect. As a judge, when we're going to put that final, pen to paper in our recap on our commentary, we're taking into consideration everything that just happened within that, that ecosystem that you created out there. The performers first and foremost, how did the crowd react? Everything. You have to take everything into consideration as part of your final result. So yeah, staff jumping up and down and all is one little, piece of what's happening during the performance, but that certainly is not having an impact on what we're doing as we're evaluating.
Right.
We're looking at the entire ecosystem. So
I had another question to throw in here too. Jeff, when I was, in the past, I would teach almost exclusively from the stands or from the box. And when you started working with us, you sort of insisted that you were on the field with the kids. And then now we have like zero time from the box. Like we just don't, with our rehearsal space and all that, we just don't do that. So like, how do you, and I think that was a great move, because being with the kids feels like allows us to be more on the wavelength of where they are, how are they doing, what are they talking about, if they're talking, like what are, we can feel the pulse of the band better, and then we can help communicate to them better too. But how do you make sure that you're with the kids and teaching, but you also have a really good effect score if you're not standing back and watching from afar?
When I stand back for afar, I've got to be at least 20 feet or more in the air and at least 20 yards to 25 yards away. If I can't get up there, then I'm not going to serve any purpose. I'm better off helping the kids, watching the kids, seeing what they're doing to make sure it's what I want up close. In many associations, they've taken away the visual or music IA person down on the field. But I always believe that if it's not occurring down on the field, it's never going to occur from somebody looking out from the box. Mm. And when we get the opportunity to be up high, I go up high, but I'm sort of, when I'm with your group, I'm always looking that it's a teaching moment. I went with my other group when I was in Connecticut. We rehearsed 6 days a week. So I was up in the box at least 3 to 4 days a week. But when I was in the box, I was 4 stories up on a scaffolding looking down at my group. And that made it real easy. Or if I wasn't up there, one of my other staff members was up there on a walkie-talkie telling me what she or he was seeing to make it better. You don't always get what you want. Where we rehearse, I think, is wonderful. And but it's on a low level, so we make it work. And when we're on the field, I try to go up top and look there as much as possible too. But wouldn't you agree, Jim, it's dictated by your...
Yeah, it clearly has to do with logistics. I mean, if you have the ability to be up, I was blessed when I was doing marching band that we did have a facility where we could be up in a press box, but only during ensemble rehearsal. I mean, we were doing, any teaching or readjusting or fixing. We were down in the field like everybody else, even with the technicians. My approach, and Jeff, you made an excellent point about making sure that the excellence is happening on the field. You can't, sometimes when you're up in the box, you get a little bit unfocused on what constitutes really excellent technical training. I like to do 360-degree cleaning. I don't do one-dimensional cleaning. To me, doesn't work. You have to clean from all three, from a 360-degree perspective, so that when you see it up above, that's when you see perfection. Otherwise, if you are only cleaning from a one-dimensional perspective, flat on from the front, you are probably going to miss some contouring. You're probably going to miss some spacing things. that will have an impact when somebody's looking at it. So, there's definitely benefits to doing both. But if you have the opportunity, make sure you spend enough time on the field for great training and enough time up above in an ensemble situation to make sure that the program is working the way you want it to work.
And Kyle, if you'll notice, when we get to the season this year, a lot of times I stand in the right end zone or the left end zone or in the back and watch rehearsal from there, because that's exactly what Jim's talking about. I can't hide, but I can see what's going on from all the different perspectives, doing it that way. Standing right in front, that's nice. but if I've taught it right, up front's going to look fine. It's what's beyond that front row that's the problem, or what alignment is occurring horizontally and vertically from the rear or the sides to get it correct.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a great point. And I remember when I finally went from paper and pen dots to actually using a computer to program the show. One of the things that I did, if we were going to be in a venue where we weren't going to have any height, I would always, before rehearsal, I would look at the video and change the perspective of it from this this angled vantage point to a more flatter vantage point. So that way I knew when I was looking at it at rehearsal, I could pinpoint things that I wanted to work on that night. So if you're working with any kind of software to program your show, and you're in a venue where you're rehearsing that doesn't have height, that's a good way to approach how you're going to do a rehearsal.
Yeah, and when I write the program I use, sometimes I'll write from the front, some I'll write from the 20-degree angle, sometimes I'll write from an end zone, and sometimes I'll write from the back so I can look up into the stands to see how it's perceived from there. And the new software and all its accompanying things have made it so much easier to write. Paper, like I said, what looked good on paper sometimes didn't translate, but with the new programs, you can be pretty assured what it's going to do if you teach it the way you put it on the paper.
Yeah. Jeff, can you take a minute to talk? This is not an ad, but the last few years we've started using UDB or Ultimate Drill Book. And I know a lot of groups do, but there's also a lot of teachers probably listening to this who've never heard of Ultimate Drill Book. It's sort of changed how we teach drill and how quickly our kids can learn and adapt. Can you give us a little plug for UDB?
Yeah, first of all, to precede that, I use Pieware, and Pieware I think has grown so much as a program for writing drill and everything. So Pieware linked up with UDB, and so you can have it on your cell phone. Before that, we had kids would do their own dot books by paper and keep them around their waists. Mm-hmm. Then we went to the UDB, where UDB provided us a dot book. But then we went to the phone, and where kids could see their paths, they could see exactly what count they crossed on a yard line. They could see where they had to do the change of direction. They could look at their next move in motion and see what they had to do, how to do it. They read the instructions in the instruction manual, and then they could watch the whole show with different perspectives. And they could also highlight themselves and watch themselves move through the show. And then, so what transpired from that was that at break time, we'd see kids go out on the field with their phone, with the drill, with the music playing from the phone, and marching the drill as a practice because a move they couldn't figure out. And I must say, I think UDB has increased our productivity of teaching drill by minimum 50%, maybe even greater, maybe even 75%, because you're not spending as much time talking about how to do something, because while the kids are standing there making sure their dots are right, they're checking to make sure they know where they're going next, how they're going, who's on their right, who's on their left, who's behind them, who's in front of them, rather than having to write that in the book like we used to have to do in drum corps, where we'd be writing all this information in the book and we'd be filling up an entire 3x5 card and just going through the spirals like crazy.
And I'll say you make, when we make changes too, right? You haven't mentioned that. You make a change as a drill writer, you update it, the kids click refresh, and all the new dots and changes are right there. They don't have to write anything down. I mean, it's like an instant change.
Well, and the best example of that was last year. We had our first session, and then from session 1 to session 2, the staff said, well, couldn't we tweak this a little bit? And I said, well, let me go get my computer. And I tweaked it, and I updated to UDB. And before we started rehearsals, we told all the kids, go to your app, update section 1 to section 1.2, and the changes were all done.
Yeah.
It took 30 seconds. It's
Phenomenal. It's
it's
fantastic.
a phenomenal program, and it makes teaching so much easier.
I was very concerned, in fact, I said no for a year or two because, kids are on their phone all the time. And I was really concerned about that. To be quite honest, it really hasn't been a problem. In my view, I think kids have done it very well and used it very well. The biggest issue we've had is kids who don't have their phone charged, right? So that's an issue sometimes. And the other one is if a kid doesn't have the phone. But as we've noticed in our thing, if they're 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old and they don't have a phone, odds are they're going to be just fine.
Yeah. And I think the thing that we've also noticed is that the one thing you got to keep reminding them, particularly the guard students, is they need a fanny pack so they can put it in on their waist. But when they had dot books, we had the same thing. They either had a fanny pack or they had a string holding it around the waist while they're working. And that helped. But Jim, I really thank you. You've helped out tremendously. And
I couldn't have done it with two better guys, and I appreciate you asking me to join in today. It was really fun.
And if anybody has questions, they're welcome to email them to us, and we'll forward them to Jim, and we can talk about it and see if we can get back to you with questions. Is that okay with you, Kyle?
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Anything else you have to say, Jim or Kyle?
No, best of luck as you get it ready for the fall. I hope you all, have wonderful seasons, and I'm looking forward to seeing some great shows this year. So,
And we're looking forward to seeing you as well.
okay.
Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you have the time, we highly recommend the After Sectionals podcast for more great listening. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director. See you next week.